There is a chamber beneath nearly every cathedral built before 1800. Not a basement, not a storage room, a vault, climate-controlled by stone and depth, accessible through passages most tourists never see, designed to preserve something specific across centuries. And what went into those vaults tells a story about knowledge, power, and a system of preservation that we've almost completely forgotten. I found this by accident. I was researching medieval building techniques, trying to understand how structures from the 1200s could still be standing, while buildings from the 1970s need constant repair. The answer kept pointing toward something beneath the churches themselves. References in architectural surveys to underground chambers. Mentions in restoration documents of sealed passages. Footnotes about humidity-controlled spaces that predated modern climate technology by 600 years. The pattern was everywhere once I started looking. Canterbury Cathedral has vaults that extend 3 levels deep. Chartres Cathedral in France contains a crypt system so extensive that portions remain unmapped. The Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela sits above chambers that weren't fully documented until the 1950s. These weren't built as tombs, though bodies were sometimes placed there later. They were built as repositories. Here's what disturbs me. We have detailed records of what went into thousands of these vaults across Europe. Inventories exist, catalogs were kept, and then across a window of about 150 years, nearly all of it vanished. Not gradually, not through decay, through systematic removal during specific historical moments that keep overlapping in ways that feel less like coincidence and more like pattern. Let me show you what I mean. In 1789, the French Revolution's National Constituent Assembly passed the Civil Constitution of the Clergy. Within 2 years, revolutionary committees had entered churches across France with explicit instructions. They weren't just taking gold candlesticks and silver chalices. They were emptying the vaults. Documents from the period describe cartloads of books, manuscripts, and records being removed. Some went to the newly established National Library. Most were sold as scrap paper or destroyed outright. The excuse was secularization. The reality was something else. Because what disappeared wasn't just religious texts. It was land records, genealogies, astronomical observations, medical treatises, agricultural data collected across centuries. The churches had been functioning as the primary archives of their regions for over 800 years. Everything that needed to survive was copied and stored in those climate-controlled chambers beneath the stone. Then it was gone. A researcher named Michel Vauvel estimated that approximately 80% of ecclesiastical archives in France were destroyed or dispersed between 1789 and 1794. Not damaged, destroyed. The vaults were systematically emptied in under 5 years, but France wasn't alone. Let me walk you through a timeline nobody assembles in one place. In 1536, Henry VIII began the dissolution of the monasteries in England. Over 4 years, 800 religious houses were closed. Their libraries, their vaults, their accumulated records, all dispersed or burned. Historian David Knowles estimated that manuscripts, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, were lost. We know what some of them contained because catalogs survived, even when the books didn't. Medical texts from the 800s, agricultural records tracking crop yields across centuries, astronomical observations predating Copernicus. In 1648, the Peace of Westphalia ended the 30 Years' War. The treaty's terms included provisions for the redistribution of church property across Protestant and Catholic territories. In the chaos of implementation, thousands of monastic libraries were emptied. Sweden alone carried off over 600 tons of books and manuscripts from Bohemian and German monasteries. Some ended up in Uppsala University. Most vanished entirely. The 1700s brought the Josephinist reforms across Austria. Emperor Joseph II dissolved over 700 monasteries between 1780 and 1790. Their contents were declared state property. Inventories show vast collections of manuscripts, many dating to the Carolingian period. By 1800, most had disappeared into private collections or been pulped for paper stock. I keep coming back to a question that bothers me more the longer I sit with it. Why did the same thing keep happening? Different countries, different centuries, different political motivations. Reformation, revolution, secularization, reform. But the result is identical every time. The vaults beneath the churches get emptied, the contents scatter or burn, and the institutional memory of what was stored there evaporates within a single generation. Let me give you a specific example of what was lost. The monastery of Cluny in France was founded in 910 AD. By the 1100s, it was the largest church in Christendom and held one of the most comprehensive libraries in Europe. The catalog from 1170 listed over 570 volumes, an enormous collection for the period. These weren't just Bibles. They included works on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, history, philosophy. The library also held documents recording land ownership, trade agreements, weather patterns, and agricultural yields across 300 years. During the French Revolution, Cluny was declared national property. The library was dispersed in 1790. Of those 570 documented volumes, fewer than 40 are known to survive today. The rest, gone. And Cluny was not exceptional. It was typical. What I'm trying to show you is that these vaults weren't storage. They were backup systems. Everything that mattered got copied and placed in the most stable environment available, deep underground, protected by stone, maintained by institutions that had existed for centuries and expected to exist for centuries more. And then those institutions were systematically dismantled, their vaults emptied, their contents erased. What was in there that required such thorough elimination? I found a partial answer in a place I wasn't expecting. The archives of the Vatican Library contain a document called the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the list of prohibited books. First issued in 1559, it was updated regularly until 1948. Most people know it banned works, like Copernicus and Galileo. What fewer people realize is that earlier editions banned entire categories of knowledge. Medical texts describing surgical techniques, astronomical tables predating the Ptolemaic model, historical chronicles that contradicted official timelines. But here's what stopped me cold. The index didn't just prohibit reading these works. It required their surrender. Possession alone was grounds for excommunication, and the penalty for hiding prohibited materials was severe enough that most complied immediately. Where did those surrendered books go? The Vatican's own records indicate they were stored in restricted sections of the library. But when researchers gained access to those sections in the 1800s, they found them largely empty. Catalogs referenced thousands of volumes. The shelves held hundreds. Someone had already been through them. Now I need to be clear about something. I'm not arguing the church was uniquely destructive. Every institution that centralized power did the same thing. The difference is that the church kept better records of what it destroyed. We know what was banned because the index survived. We know what was confiscated because surrender lists were filed. We can trace the shape of what's missing because the bureaucracy was meticulous. Other institutions simply burned everything and kept no inventory. Let me show you what I mean. In 1258, the Mongols sacked Baghdad. The House of Wisdom, the greatest library in the Islamic world, was destroyed. Scholars estimate it held between 400,000 and 1 million manuscripts. The Tigris River reportedly ran black with ink for days from all the books thrown into it. We know what some of those texts contained because fragments survived in other libraries. Advanced mathematics that wouldn't appear in Europe for another 300 years. Medical procedures still used today. Star charts accurate enough to navigate by, but the bulk of it, gone. And because the Mongols kept no records, we'll never know the full scope of what was lost. Compare that to what happened in Alexandria. Everyone knows about the Library of Alexandria burning. What almost no one mentions is that it burned multiple times across several centuries. Julius Caesar's forces in 48 BC, Christian riots in 391 AD, Muslim conquest in 642 AD. Each time, a portion survived. Each time, what survived was smaller. By 1000 AD, nothing remained except references and other texts to works that no longer existed. But here's the detail that matters. We have letters from scholars describing what was in Alexandria before each destruction. We have catalogs. We have complaints from later scholars about specific lost works. The shape of the loss is documented, even though the contents are gone. The monastic vaults followed a different pattern. They weren't destroyed by invading armies or sudden catastrophe. They were systematically emptied by governments that kept detailed records of the process. And then those records were either lost or remain classified. France's National Archives hold inventories from the revolutionary seizures. Most are marked as damaged by fire or water. The ones that survive show thousands of volumes confiscated and transferred to state custody. Then the trail goes cold. The books were logged in. They never logged out. I started cross-referencing what little documentation remains. Monastery dissolution records from England, Josephinist inventories from Austria, French revolutionary seizure lists, Swedish war booty catalogs, and a pattern emerged that I cannot explain away as coincidence. The same categories of knowledge disappear from every collection. Advanced metallurgy texts, architectural treatises describing construction methods no longer used, agricultural records spanning centuries, medical manuscripts detailing treatments that modern medicine dismissed as superstition and is only now rediscovering, maps showing coastlines and territories that don't match current geography, historical chronicles that place events in different sequences than accepted timelines. It's not that these subjects were completely erased. It's that the primary sources vanished while secondary references survived. We have monks writing about reading a text on Roman concrete in the 1100s. The text itself is gone. We have letters between scholars discussing astronomical observations from the 800s. The observation logs disappeared. We have inventories listing manuscripts on subjects we can no longer verify existed because no examples remain. What if the vaults weren't just storage? What if they were insurance? Every significant discovery, every innovation, every piece of knowledge that contradicted official narratives got copied and placed underground, where it couldn't be easily destroyed. And then over the course of 400 years, every government that centralized power found a reason to empty those vaults. Different justifications, same result. The backup system was systematically dismantled, and what it protected vanished with it. Now here's where it gets strange. Some of those vaults are still there, still sealed, still unexplored. The Vatican has approximately 53 miles of shelving in its secret archives, renamed the Apostolic Archives in 2019, though the content remains largely the same. closed to outsiders until 1881. Even now, access requires written application months in advance, specific justification for each document requested, and you cannot browse. You must know exactly what you're asking for before you're allowed to see it. Researchers describe the experience as archaeological. You request a manuscript by catalog number. It arrives. You examine it under supervision. You leave. What's in the other boxes, the ones you didn't specifically request? No one knows unless they already know. Monte Cassino in Italy, founded by Saint Benedict in 524 AD, destroyed and rebuilt 4 times. The most recent destruction came during World War II, when Allied bombing reduced the monastery to rubble in 1944. Before the bombing, German forces evacuated artwork and manuscripts to the Vatican. After the war, some items were returned, some weren't. The monastery's own records list hundreds of volumes transferred for safekeeping that never came back. When researchers inquire, they're told the documents are still being catalogued. 80 years later, still being catalogued. Strahov Monastery in Prague holds 200,000 volumes in 2 Baroque halls that look like something from a fantasy film. Tourists photograph the architecture. The rare book collection sits in climate-controlled rooms behind locked doors. The catalog lists works in their possession, but doesn't describe contents in detail. A manuscript from 1143 is listed simply as theological commentary. 20 pages or 200? Commentary on what specifically? The catalog doesn't say. You'd have to request it to find out. I started mapping which monasteries still have sealed sections, not tourist areas, not the parts converted into museums, the vaults that remain closed. Montserrat in Spain has chambers carved into the mountain that haven't been opened in over a century. Skellig Michael off the coast of Ireland, that isolated rock where monks lived in stone beehives for 600 years, has chambers beneath the surface that were sealed when the monastery was abandoned in the 1100s. No excavation has been attempted. The Irish government lists the entire island as archaeologically sensitive, which prevents invasive exploration. Then there's Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls site. Between 1947 and 1956, approximately 950 scrolls were recovered from 11 caves. The scrolls dated between 300 BC and 100 AD. Groundbreaking discovery. What gets less attention is how many caves in that region remain unexplored. Archaeologists estimate at least 200 additional caves exist in the cliffs surrounding the Dead Sea. Bedouin shepherds found the first scrolls by accident. Organized excavations found more. Then the excavations stopped, not because they'd exhausted the possibilities. Funding dried up, political complications. The Jordanian government controls access to some areas. The Israeli government controls others. Palestinian territories overlap the region. Academic institutions argue over excavation rights. Meanwhile, the caves sit untouched. In 2017, researchers using LiDAR technology discovered a previously unknown chamber beneath the treasury at Petra. 12 meters below the iconic facade, a space large enough to hold significant contents. Excavation hasn't begun. Too politically sensitive. The Jordanian Department of Antiquities approved preliminary studies but not full excavation. The chamber remains sealed. Every government that centralized power found those vaults. Every time the official reason for opening them sounded reasonable. Cataloging for preservation, transferring to secure facilities, protecting from looters or invaders, and every time, what went in didn't match what came out. The discrepancy gets explained as clerical error, fire damage, wartime confusion, but the pattern repeats too consistently across too many centuries to be coincidence. You can still see the architecture. The vaults weren't hidden. They were prominent features of monastery design. Reinforced chambers built into foundations, underground rooms accessible only through the main church, storage spaces designed to survive fire, flood, siege. They're empty now, converted into wine cellars or tour stops, or simply sealed and forgotten. But the spaces remain. Physical evidence that something was important enough to protect this way. Scholars talk about lost knowledge, as if it evaporated naturally. Languages die out, technologies get superseded, information fades, but physical objects don't evaporate. Books don't dissolve. Manuscripts don't vanish unless someone moves them. And the people who moved them kept records. Those records exist. They're just not accessible, or they're damaged, or they're classified, or they're being cataloged. 80 years and counting. What knowledge sits in chambers that haven't been opened in centuries? What got transferred to state custody and never logged again? What did monks consider important enough to hide underground for 1,000 years? We'll never know unless someone decides we should. Until then, the vaults remain. Some empty, some sealed. All of them evidence of a system designed to preserve what centralized power kept finding reasons to take. The backup system failed, not because the vaults were breached, because the governments that emptied them controlled what happened to the contents afterward, and nothing that contradicted the official story survived that filter. The chambers are still there. Walk into any cathedral built before 1800, and somewhere beneath your feet, carved into stone, reinforced against time itself, sits a vault that once held something worth protecting across centuries. Most are empty now. Some remain sealed, and the difference between those two states might be the most important detail of all. Because what if the ones that are still sealed aren't sealed to keep us out? What if they're sealed because someone already knows what's inside and decided we shouldn't? Every government that opened these vaults kept meticulous records of the process, and then those records disappeared, or got damaged, or remain classified for reasons that sound reasonable until you notice the same excuse appearing across 3 centuries in 8 different countries. The vaults beneath Canterbury still extend 3 levels deep. Chartres has passages that remain unmapped. Santiago de Compostela contains chambers that weren't documented until the 1950s, and even that documentation is incomplete. The spaces exist. The architecture proves they were designed for preservation, and somewhere in restricted archives, in climate-controlled rooms that require written permission to enter, sit the inventories describing what went into them. The question isn't whether the records exist, it's whether anyone who finds them is allowed to tell you what they say.